Welcome to the Sleepy Bat. Tonight we're leaving behind the castles and knights to step into a darker reality. What it truly meant to be homeless in medieval Europe. No warm hearths, no safety nets, no second chances, just cold nights, empty stomachs, and a world that saw you as invisible. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now settle in, close your eyes, and let's drift back to an age where having no home often meant no hope at all. So congratulations, you've just woken up in medieval Europe with nothing. No home, no family, no protection. You're a vagabond and you're in serious trouble. The first thing that hits you is the cold. It's always cold when you're homeless in medieval times, even in summer. You're lying on bare ground, maybe under a bridge if you're lucky, maybe in a ditch beside the road if you're not. Your clothes, what's left of them, are threadbare rags that provide almost no protection against the elements. They're stiff with dirt, sweat, and worse things you'd rather not think about. They smell like decay and desperation, and they mark you immediately as someone who doesn't belong anywhere. Your stomach is hollow, cramping with a hunger so deep it's become a constant companion. When did you last eat? 2 days ago? 3? You found some scraps behind a monastery kitchen, moldy bread that the pigs had rejected, vegetable peelings that were already turning black. You ate them anyway, grateful for anything that might keep you alive another day. But hunger is just one of your problems. In medieval society, everyone has a place, except you. Peasants belong to their lords, craftsmen belong to their guilds, clergy belong to the church. You belong nowhere, which makes you dangerous in the eyes of everyone else. You're a threat to the natural order, a walking reminder that the system isn't as stable as people want to believe. The medieval world operates on a strict hierarchy that's supposedly ordained by God himself. At the top sits the king, granted divine authority to rule. Below him are the nobles, the lords and ladies who own vast estates and command armies. Below them are the clergy who tend to souls and maintain God's word on earth. Below them are the craftsmen and merchants who create goods and facilitate trade. And at the bottom are the peasants who work the land and produce the food that keeps everyone else alive. But you? You don't fit anywhere in this carefully constructed pyramid. You're what they call masterless. A person without a lord, without a trade, without a family to claim you. In a world where your identity is entirely defined by who you serve and where you belong. Being masterless makes you less than human in many people's eyes. The legal system reflects this harsh reality. There are different laws for different classes of people. And as someone with no status whatsoever, you have virtually no legal protections. A nobleman can strike you down in the street and face minimal consequences, if any. A merchant can refuse to sell you food even if you somehow scrape together enough coins. A peasant can chase you from their village with dogs and pitchforks, and the local authorities will thank them for it. Vagrancy itself is a crime in most places. Simply existing without a fixed address, without a master to vouch for you, makes you a criminal by default. The punishment for vagrancy varies from place to place, but it's never pleasant. You might be whipped in the town square, branded with hot irons to mark you as a wanderer, or thrown into a dungeon so foul that many prisoners die before their sentence is up. Some places have even harsher penalties. Repeat offenders might have their ears cut off or their noses slit. Permanent disfigurements that ensure everyone knows what you are from a distance. In the most severe cases, chronic vagrants are simply executed, hanged or beheaded as a warning to others who might be tempted to live outside society's rigid boundaries. You've learned to recognize the signs of approaching trouble. The way conversations stop when you enter a village. The way mothers pull their children closer and cross themselves. The way dogs start barking before their owners even notice you. You've become expert at reading faces, at knowing within seconds whether someone might show you mercy or call for the town guards. Most of the time it's the latter, because in medieval times charity is complicated. The church preaches about helping the poor and the unfortunate, and there are indeed some who take this seriously. Monasteries sometimes distribute bread to beggars, and individual Christians might occasionally offer alms. But there's a crucial distinction made between the deserving poor and people like you. The deserving poor are those who've fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. Widows, orphans, the sick and disabled. They're pitied and sometimes helped because their misfortune is seen as God's will, a test of faith that good Christians should help them endure. But you're assumed to be poor by choice, a lazy wastrel who could work if only you weren't so morally corrupt. The fact that you have no master, no home, no trade is seen as evidence of your bad character rather than your bad luck. This attitude is reinforced by the Church's teachings about work and social order. The medieval worldview holds that God has assigned everyone a place in society, and trying to move outside that place is a form of rebellion against divine will. Peasants are supposed to work the fields, craftsmen are supposed to practice their trades, nobles are supposed to rule and fight. If you're not doing any of these things, you must be defying God's plan for your life. Stella. The reality, of course, is far more complex. Many homeless people in medieval times didn't choose their situation. You might be a peasant whose lord died and whose heir decided to consolidate his lands differently, leaving you with nowhere to go. You might be a craftsman whose guild expelled you for some minor infraction, making it impossible to practice your trade legally. You might be a soldier who came home from war to find your family dead and your home burned, with no lord willing to take you into service. You might be fleeing an abusive master, escaping religious persecution, or simply trying to find work in a different region. Medieval people were far more mobile than many assume. They traveled for trade, for pilgrimages, for seasonal labor. But the difference between legitimate travel and vagrancy was often just a matter of documentation and sponsorship that you couldn't provide. Without papers proving your identity and purpose. Without letters of introduction from respected citizens, without coins to pay for food and lodging, any journey becomes a crime. You're caught in a trap where you need resources to prove you're respectable, but you can't earn those resources without first proving you're respectable. The physical challenges of homelessness in medieval times are almost unimaginable by modern standards. There are no shelters, no soup kitchens, no government assistance programs. When winter comes, you either find shelter somehow or you die. It's that simple. Many homeless people don't survive their first winter on the road. The lucky ones might find work as seasonal laborers, helping with harvests or construction projects in exchange for temporary food and shelter. But this work is backbreaking and dangerous, and it's only available at certain times of year. The unlucky ones try to survive by begging, stealing, or selling whatever they can, including, in the most desperate cases, their own bodies. Disease is a constant threat when you're living rough. Without access to clean water, proper sanitation, or adequate nutrition, your body becomes vulnerable to every illness that comes along. A simple cold can turn into pneumonia when you're sleeping outdoors in wet clothes. A small cut can become infected and kill you when you have no way to keep it clean. Mental illness, whether caused by your circumstances or contributing to them, makes everything worse. Medieval people have no understanding of psychological trauma or chemical imbalances in the brain. If you're acting strangely, talking to yourself, having hallucinations, showing signs of depression or anxiety, you're likely to be seen as possessed by demons or cursed by God. This makes people even more afraid of you and even less likely to help. The social isolation might be the hardest part of all. Humans are social creatures, and being cut off from all normal human connections does something to your mind that's hard to describe. You start talking to yourself because you haven't heard your own voice in days. You start forgetting basic social skills because you have no one to practice them with. You begin to see yourself the way others see you, as something less than fully human. Yet somehow you keep going, because the alternative is giving up, and something deep inside you refuses to do that. You develop an almost supernatural ability to find food where others would see nothing. Roots and berries that are barely edible, scraps of meat clinging to bones that have been thrown away, grain that's fallen from merchant wagons and gotten mixed with dirt. You learn to read the weather with uncanny accuracy because knowing when rain or snow is coming can mean the difference between life and death. You become expert at finding shelter in places others would never think to look. Hollow trees, abandoned buildings, caves, even burial crypts when you're desperate enough. You develop a sixth sense for danger, learning to recognize the sound of approaching horses, the meaning of different church bells, the significance of smoke rising from various directions. Your survival depends on constantly gathering information about the world around you, even when that world wants nothing to do with you, and gradually you begin to understand that you're not alone. There are others like you, other masterless people trying to survive on the margins of medieval society. You start to recognize them by subtle signs, the way they move through crowds, the places they choose to rest, the careful way they approach potential sources of food or shelter. Sometimes you band together, forming loose groups that travel the roads together for safety and companionship. These groups have their own informal hierarchies, their own codes of conduct, their own ways of sharing resources and information. They're not quite families and not quite gangs, but something in between. Communities of the dispossessed trying to create some semblance of human connection in a world that's rejected them. But even these temporary alliances are fragile, because desperation makes people unpredictable. Trust becomes a luxury you can't always afford when you're fighting for survival. You learn to sleep with one eye open, to hide anything of value, to be ready to run at a moment's notice. The medieval world is about to teach you lessons about human nature that you never wanted to learn, about how thin the line is between civilization and chaos, about what people are capable of when they have nothing left to lose. And your education in the dark reality of medieval homelessness has only just begun. The sun rises on another day of your invisible existence, and you begin the careful ritual of waking up without drawing attention to yourself. You've learned to sleep lightly, always ready to move at the first sign of trouble. Your body aches in ways that go deeper than muscle and bone. It's the ache of constant stress, of never feeling truly safe, of sleeping on ground that's always too hard and never warm enough. Your first task each morning is assessment. Are you injured? Are you sick? Can you walk? These aren't idle questions. They're matters of life and death. An injury that would be minor for someone with a home and family becomes potentially fatal when you have nowhere to heal and no one to care for you. You've seen other vagrants die from infected cuts that a proper physician could have treated easily. But physicians don't treat people who can't pay. You check your feet first. They're your most important tools now. Blisters, cuts, swelling, anything that might prevent you from walking could spell doom. Your shoes, if you still have them, are falling apart. Leather cracks and separates when it's constantly wet and never properly dried. The soles are worn thin from endless walking on rough medieval roads that are little more than rutted dirt tracks. If you're lucky enough to still have shoes, you guard them jealously. You've seen homeless people killed for their footwear, and you understand why. Walking barefoot on medieval roads means stepping on sharp stones, thorns, broken pottery, animal waste, and worse. Your feet would be cut to ribbons within days, and infected wounds would follow shortly after. The hunger never goes away, but it changes. At first, it's sharp and demanding, making your stomach cramp and your hands shake. After weeks or months of chronic malnutrition, it becomes something else. A hollow, gnawing emptiness that affects your ability to think clearly. Your body starts consuming itself, burning muscle mass for energy when there's no food available. You learn to recognize the signs of starvation in yourself and others. The way your hair becomes brittle and starts falling out. The way your gums begin to bleed and your teeth feel loose in your mouth. The way small cuts take forever to heal because your body lacks the nutrients needed for basic repair. The way your mind starts playing tricks on you, making you see food where there isn't any, or making you forget whether you've eaten recently. Scavenging becomes an art form. You know which taverns throw out their scraps at what times of day. You know which monasteries are most likely to share their bread, and which ones will set the dogs on you. You know how to approach a butcher's shop to beg for bones and gristle without triggering their anger. You know which wild plants are edible and which will kill you, though in your desperation you sometimes take chances you shouldn't. But even scavenging has its rules and territories. Other homeless people stake out the best spots, and trying to infringe on their claimed areas can lead to violence. You might find yourself fighting over a pile of kitchen scraps with someone as desperate as you are, knowing that whoever loses might not eat for another day or two. The medieval countryside offers some opportunities that towns don't. Wild berries, nuts, roots that can be dug up and eaten. Streams where you might catch fish with your bare hands or improvised traps. But the countryside also has its own dangers. Wild animals, harsh weather with no shelter, and the constant risk of being caught on someone's land without permission. Poaching is a serious crime, punishable by death in many areas. Simply catching a rabbit or taking a fish from someone else's stream can get you hanged. The forests and fields that look like free sources of food are actually carefully controlled resources belonging to lords and nobles who guard them jealously. Game animals, fruit trees, even firewood are all someone's property, and taking them without permission makes you a thief. You learn to move like a ghost through these landscapes, taking only what you absolutely need and leaving no trace of your presence. You become expert at reading the signs that tell you whether an area is heavily patrolled, whether dogs are used to guard livestock, whether the local lord is known for harsh punishments or occasional mercy. The social dynamics of medieval homelessness create their own complex world. You encounter other types of displaced people: pilgrims traveling to holy sites, merchants between destinations, entertainers moving from town to town. Some of these travelers have legitimate reasons for being on the road and papers to prove it. Others are just as homeless as you are, but better at disguising it. You learn to recognize the different categories of people you'll meet. There are the sturdy beggars, people who appear able-bodied but claim disability to earn sympathy and alms. There are the genuine invalids, people with real injuries or illnesses who've been cast out because they can no longer work. There are the criminals, people fleeing justice who've taken to the roads because they have no other choice. There are also the religious wanderers, people who've taken vows of poverty and travel from place to place preaching or performing religious duties. These people are sometimes tolerated, even respected, but only if they can prove their religious credentials. Without proper documentation from church authorities, you're just another vagrant to most people. The seasonal rhythms of medieval life affect you profoundly. Summer brings the possibility of outdoor survival, seasonal work during harvest time, and pilgrimage season when the roads are full of legitimate travelers who might share their food or offer you temporary work. But summer also brings increased patrols, more officials watching for vagrants, and higher penalties for being caught without proper documentation. Winter is the great killer. When the cold comes, homeless people die in large numbers. Those who survive often do so by accepting terrible conditions, sleeping in stables with animals, hiding in crypts among the dead, or subjecting themselves to abuse from people who offer shelter in exchange for degrading labor. You learn that begging is both an art and a science. Different approaches work with different types of people. Religious appeals work better with clergy and devout lay people. Claims of being a disabled veteran might earn sympathy from former soldiers. Appearing sick or injured sometimes triggers charitable impulses, but it can also make people afraid you're contagious and drive them away. The timing of your begging matters enormously. Approaching people right after church services when they're feeling spiritually minded can be effective. Market days bring crowds and opportunities, but also increased security and officials watching for troublemakers. Festival days might make people generous, or they might make them want to chase away anything that spoils their celebration. You become an expert at reading body language and facial expressions, knowing within seconds whether someone might help you or whether you should disappear before they call for guards. You learn to make yourself as non-threatening as possible, keeping your head down, your voice soft, your movements slow and submissive. But even successful begging rarely provides enough to live on. A few coins might buy a piece of bread, but you need constant income to survive, and people's charity has limits. Many towns have laws limiting how long beggars can stay, forcing you to keep moving even when you found a relatively good situation. The legal system becomes a constant threat hanging over your existence. Town guards and local officials are always watching for vagrants to arrest. The penalties grow harsher with each offense. First-time vagrancy might earn you a public whipping and expulsion from town. Second-time offense could mean branding or mutilation. Third-time offense might be death. These punishments aren't just legal penalties. They're public entertainment. Crowds gather to watch vagrants being whipped, branded, or executed. The spectacle serves as both punishment for you and warning to others who might be tempted to live outside society's boundaries. Your suffering becomes a form of moral education for the community. You develop an intimate knowledge of different regions' laws and enforcement patterns. Some areas are known for relative tolerance, others for brutal crackdowns. Some lords are rumored to occasionally show mercy, others take pride in their harsh treatment of vagrants. This knowledge becomes crucial for survival, knowing which roads to avoid, which towns never to enter, which officials might accept a bribe to look the other way. The church's role in your life is complicated and contradictory. On one hand, Christian doctrine preaches charity and care for the poor. Many of your best chances for food and shelter come from religious institutions, monasteries that distribute bread, churches that allow people to shelter in their doorways, individual Christians who take their charitable duties seriously. But the church also reinforces the social order that keeps you marginalized. Sermons about accepting your station in life, about the divine nature of social hierarchy, about the moral corruption that leads to poverty. All of this creates an ideological framework that justifies your treatment. You're not just poor, you're spiritually deficient. Your homelessness isn't just bad luck, it's evidence of God's disfavor. Some clergy are genuinely compassionate and try to help within the constraints of their position. Others see vagrants as threats to social stability who should be controlled or eliminated. You learn to read these differences quickly because approaching the wrong clergyman can result in immediate arrest rather than assistance. The psychological toll of this existence goes far beyond simple hardship. The constant rejection, the daily reminder that you're unwanted, the knowledge that most people see you as less than human, it changes something fundamental in your mind. You start to internalize the hatred directed at you, to see yourself through the eyes of those who despise you. Shame becomes a constant companion. Shame at your appearance, your smell, your desperation. Shame at the things you've had to do to survive. Begging, stealing, accepting degrading treatment from people who see you as entertainment. Shame at how far you've fallen from whatever life you had before this nightmare began. The isolation might be the cruelest part of all. Humans need social connection to maintain their sanity. But as a vagrant, you're cut off from normal human relationships. People don't see you as a person with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and fears. They see you as a problem to be solved or a threat to be eliminated. You start talking to yourself because you need to hear human voices, even if it's your own. You create imaginary conversations with people from your past, with God, with anyone who might listen. Other people see this as evidence of madness, further proof that vagrants are dangerous and unstable. But somehow, against all odds, you adapt. The human capacity for survival is remarkable, and you discover reserves of strength and cunning you never knew you possessed. You become a shadow person, moving through medieval society's margins, invisible when you need to be, resourceful when you have to be, enduring because the alternative is unthinkable. And as winter approaches again, as the days grow shorter and the cold begins to bite, you know that your greatest test is still ahead. You've learned that winter in medieval times isn't just cold. It's a season of death that stalks homeless people with methodical precision. The first frost isn't just uncomfortable. It's a warning that your time is running out. You need to find more permanent shelter, more reliable food sources, or you simply won't see spring. The medieval calendar revolves around agricultural cycles that determine when work is available and when it isn't. Harvest season offers temporary opportunities. Farmers need extra hands to bring in crops, and some might pay with food and a few nights' shelter in a barn. But once the harvest is done, those opportunities vanish. The winter months are lean times even for established peasants, and there's certainly nothing extra for wandering vagrants. You've watched other homeless people prepare for winter in different ways. Some try to get themselves arrested on purpose, figuring that a dungeon cell, however miserable, is warmer than sleeping outdoors. They'll commit minor crimes in full view of town guards, hoping for sentences that will keep them locked up until spring. It's a dangerous gamble. Medieval justice is unpredictable, and you might get a harsher punishment than you bargained for. Others attempt to attach themselves to religious institutions for the winter months. They claim religious conversion, sudden piety, anything that might convince a monastery to take them in as lay brothers or servants. Some genuinely do find faith in their desperation, but most are simply trying to survive. The clergy usually see through these deceptions, but occasionally someone desperate enough and convincing enough manages to secure shelter until the weather improves. The most desperate try to find work in the worst possible conditions, jobs that regular people won't take because they're too dangerous or degrading. Cleaning out cesspits, hauling corpses during plague outbreaks, working in mines or quarries where cave-ins and toxic air kill workers regularly. These jobs exist because someone has to do them, and homeless people with no other options sometimes become that someone. You've learned to recognize the signs of hypothermia in yourself and others. It starts with uncontrollable shivering, then progresses to confusion and slurred speech. Your fingers and toes go numb first, then the numbness spreads inward. People in the final stages of freezing to death often become strangely euphoric, convinced they're warming up when they're actually dying. You've found bodies in the morning of people who stripped off their clothes in the final delirium of hypothermia, their frozen corpses a warning of what awaits you if you're not careful. Fire becomes an obsession during winter months, not just for warmth, but for psychological comfort. The dancing flames remind you that life and heat still exist in a world that seems determined to freeze you solid. But fire requires fuel, and fuel belongs to someone. Gathering wood without permission is theft, punishable like any other crime. You learn to scavenge for the smallest scraps, twigs, dried grass, anything that might burn for a few precious minutes. Making fire without proper tools is nearly impossible in wet, cold conditions. You need dry tinder, which is almost non-existent during winter rains and snow. You need steel and flint, or at least two pieces of flint that can create sparks when struck together. These tools are valuable enough that other desperate people might kill you for them, so you guard them carefully while knowing that losing them might mean death. The medieval understanding of cold weather is limited and often dangerous. People believe that cold air itself is poisonous, that breathing it directly will make you sick. They think that sudden temperature changes can stop your heart, that wet clothes will give you lung fever, that sleeping on cold ground will freeze your blood. Some of these beliefs have grains of truth, but the remedies they suggest are often worse than useless. You learn that different types of cold affect your body differently. Dry cold is harsh but manageable if you can stay out of the wind. Wet cold seeps into everything: your clothes, your bedding, your bones themselves. It's the wet cold that kills most efficiently because moisture conducts heat away from your body faster than you can generate it. Snow might actually provide insulation if you know how to use it properly, but few medieval people understand this principle. Frostbite becomes a constant concern. Your extremities, fingers, toes, nose, ears, are the first to suffer when your body starts shutting down circulation to preserve core temperature. Mild frostbite causes painful swelling and blisters. Severe frostbite kills tissue completely, leading to gangrene and the need for amputation if you're lucky enough to find someone willing to perform it. But even if you survive the cold, winter brings other challenges. Food becomes even scarcer as stored supplies dwindle and fresh sources disappear. Wild plants die back or go dormant, animals hibernate or migrate to warmer areas. The streams and ponds where you might catch fish freeze solid. Even garbage becomes harder to find as people generate less waste and guard their scraps more carefully. Your clothing, inadequate as it was, becomes even less useful as it deteriorates further. Constant dampness causes leather to rot and fabric to fall apart. You learn to stuff grass, leaves, even scraps of cloth into your garments for additional insulation. You wrap your feet in whatever materials you can find, creating improvised shoes that fall apart within days but might prevent frostbite until you can find something better. The psychological effects of winter compound your existing mental strain. The shorter days mean less light, and the lack of sunlight affects your mood in ways you can't quite understand. Medieval people know that winter makes people melancholy, but they attribute it to cold humors affecting the brain rather than understanding the biological processes involved. Seasonal depression hits homeless people particularly hard because they have no comfortable indoor spaces to retreat to, no warm fires to gather around, no family celebrations to look forward to. Winter becomes a gray, endless tunnel of survival with no light at the end except the distant hope of spring, assuming you live long enough to see it. The social dynamics of winter homelessness create their own brutal hierarchies. Stronger, more experienced vagrants might claim the best shelter spots and defend them violently from newcomers. Weaker individuals get pushed into the most exposed areas where they're most likely to freeze. Some groups form temporary alliances to share body heat and resources, but these arrangements often collapse under the stress of competing survival needs. You discover that medieval buildings, even well-constructed ones, offer limited protection from winter weather. Stone walls conduct cold efficiently, making castle dungeons and church crypts nearly as frigid as the outdoors. Wooden structures have gaps between boards that allow wind and snow to penetrate. Even when you manage to find indoor shelter, it might not be significantly warmer than staying outside. The few heated spaces that exist are jealously guarded. Tavern common rooms, monastery kitchens, blacksmith shops. Anywhere with a fire becomes a magnet for cold, desperate people. But these spaces belong to others, and you can't stay long without permission. You might warm yourself for a few minutes by standing near a smithy's forge, but eventually someone will chase you away. Medieval people's understanding of disease makes winter even more dangerous for homeless individuals. They believe that cold air carries illness, that sudden temperature changes cause fever, that wet clothing leads to consumption. While some of these beliefs reflect real health risks, the treatments they prescribe often make things worse. Bloodletting to treat fever, purging to eliminate cold humors, exposure to cleansing air. All of these can weaken someone who's already struggling to survive. You learn to recognize the early signs of winter-related illnesses in yourself. The persistent cough that might be the beginning of pneumonia. The joint pain that could indicate rheumatism. The skin problems that result from constant dampness and poor nutrition. Without access to medical care, even minor health issues can quickly become life-threatening conditions. The medieval calendar of religious observances creates both opportunities and additional challenges during winter months. Christmas season brings increased charitable giving, as prosperous Christians try to earn spiritual merit through acts of generosity. But it also brings increased security and law enforcement, as authorities want to prevent vagrants from spoiling the celebrations. Advent and Lent are seasons of prescribed fasting for devout Christians, which might mean less food available for begging or scavenging. But there are also times when people are supposed to focus on spiritual matters, potentially making them more sympathetic to the poor and desperate. You learn to time your appeals carefully, approaching people when they're most likely to be in charitable moods. The feast days scattered throughout winter provide brief opportunities for better food. Scraps from special meals, leftover bread from religious celebrations, bones from holiday roasts. But these occasions also remind you painfully of everything you've lost, of the family gatherings and warm celebrations that you'll never experience again. You develop a deep, visceral hatred of wind that goes beyond simple discomfort. Wind strips away body heat, penetrates through any gap in your clothing, makes fire nearly impossible to maintain, and creates a sound that seems designed to drive you insane. You learn to read wind patterns, to find sheltered spots where the air is still, to position yourself so that buildings or natural features block the worst gusts. The relationship between cold and hunger becomes a vicious cycle that you understand intimately. Cold weather increases your body's caloric needs just when food becomes hardest to find. Hunger makes you more susceptible to cold because your body lacks the energy needed to maintain proper temperature. Malnutrition affects your circulation, making extremities more prone to frostbite. Poor nutrition weakens your immune system, making you more vulnerable to cold-related illnesses. Sleep becomes both more necessary and more dangerous during winter. Your body needs rest to cope with the additional stress of cold weather, but sleeping outdoors in freezing temperatures can be fatal. You learn to take short naps rather than sleeping for long periods, to choose sleeping spots that offer some protection from wind and precipitation, to sleep with other people when possible for shared body heat. The few sources of winter employment available to homeless people are typically the most dangerous and degrading jobs in medieval society. Ice cutting on frozen rivers and ponds where falling through the ice means almost certain death. Cleaning out latrines and waste pits that are frozen solid and require chipping away with crude tools. Hauling firewood in conditions where frost-bitten fingers can't grip properly and slippery paths lead to serious falls. Even when you find work, payment is often minimal. Just enough food to keep you barely alive. Shelter that's only marginally better than sleeping outdoors. Employers know that desperate people will accept almost anything, and they take advantage accordingly. You might work all day splitting wood or hauling water only to receive a bowl of thin gruel and permission to sleep in a drafty stable. The medieval understanding of poverty creates additional barriers during winter months. Prosperous people believe that the poor deserve their suffering as punishment for moral failings. The fact that you're cold and hungry is seen as evidence that God disapproves of your life choices. This attitude makes people less likely to help and more likely to view your suffering as deserved justice. Religious teachings about poverty send mixed messages that affect how people treat you. On one hand, Christianity preaches charity and care for the less fortunate. On the other hand, it also teaches that earthly suffering is temporary, and that accepting your lot with patience will be rewarded in the afterlife. This creates a mindset where people might pray for your soul while doing nothing to alleviate your physical suffering. You begin to understand that surviving medieval winter as a homeless person requires more than just endurance. It requires becoming someone you never wanted to be. Someone who can steal without hesitation when the alternative is death. Someone who can lie convincingly about disabilities or religious conversion. Someone who can abandon weaker companions when helping them would endanger your own survival. The moral compromises required for winter survival leave psychological scars that persist long after the weather improves. Every choice becomes a calculation of costs and benefits measured in terms of life and death. Every relationship becomes transactional. Every act of kindness becomes suspect because kindness is a luxury that few can afford when survival is at stake. But even in the depths of winter, even when death seems more likely than survival, Something stubborn in you refuses to give up. Maybe it's simple biological instinct, the body's refusal to stop fighting even when the mind is ready to quit. Maybe it's the memory of better times, the hope that things could improve if you can just hold on a little longer. Maybe it's nothing more than spite. The determination not to let a cruel world have the satisfaction of defeating you. As the winter nights grow longer and the cold deepens, you prepare for the hardest test of all. Not just surviving until spring, but maintaining enough humanity to make survival worthwhile. The deepest part of winter arrives like a physical presence, settling over the medieval world with the weight of inevitability. You've learned that January and February aren't just months on a calendar. They're a test of everything you've become. Everything you've learned about survival, everything you're willing to sacrifice to see another dawn. Your body has changed in ways that would horrify your former self. Your ribs show clearly through skin that's taken on a grayish pallor from months of poor nutrition and constant exposure. Your hair has become brittle and thin, falling out in patches that you try to hide under whatever head covering you can fashion. Your gums bleed when you eat, and several of your teeth feel loose in their sockets. But these physical changes are nothing compared to the mental adaptations you've made. You've developed what might be called a survivor's paranoia, a constant awareness of every person around you, every potential threat, every possible opportunity. Your sleep has become a series of brief, light dozes rather than the deep rest your body craves. You wake at the slightest sound, instantly alert, ready to run or fight or disappear into shadows. The hierarchy among winter vagrants has crystallized into something that resembles a primitive society. At the top are the veterans, people who've survived multiple winters on the road and accumulated the knowledge, connections, and ruthlessness necessary to keep doing so. They know which merchants can be bribed to look the other way, which officials can be convinced to reduce sentences, which monasteries have corrupt administrators who'll sell shelter for services you'd rather not think about. Below them are the specialists, people who've developed particular skills that make them valuable to others. The ones who can start fires in impossible conditions, who know which wild plants remain edible even in deep winter, who can fashion crude weapons from scavenged materials, who can treat injuries and illnesses with whatever remedies they can improvise. These people trade their expertise for protection and shared resources. Then there are people like you, experienced enough to have survived this long but still learning, still making mistakes that could prove fatal. You're past the stage of complete helplessness, but you haven't yet achieved the cold competence of the true veterans. You're dangerous enough to be respected, but not so dangerous that others see you as a threat to be eliminated. At the bottom of this hierarchy are the newcomers, people who've recently joined the ranks of the homeless and haven't yet adapted to the realities of their situation. They still have hope, which makes them vulnerable. They still have moral qualms about theft and deception, which makes them ineffective. They still believe that their situation is temporary, that help will come from somewhere, that they don't need to learn the harsh lessons that survival requires. You watch these newcomers with a mixture of pity and calculation. Their naivety might endanger everyone in a group situation, but their relative cleanliness and innocence might also make them more effective beggars. Their unwillingness to steal might mean more resources for those who have no such scruples, but it also means they might starve before learning better. The social dynamics within these informal groups are constantly shifting. Alliances form and dissolve based on immediate needs and opportunities. Someone who shares their food with you today might try to steal your shoes tomorrow if their own fall apart. Trust becomes a measured commodity. You give exactly as much as circumstances require and no more. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when a group is about to fracture, the way conversations become shorter and more guarded, the way people start hoarding small items they previously shared freely, the way eyes linger a little too long on others' possessions. When you see these signs, you start planning your exit strategy, because staying with a group that's falling apart is often more dangerous than being alone. The winter landscape itself becomes a character in your daily struggle. Snow that looks beautiful from a warm room becomes an enemy that soaks through your inadequate clothing and makes walking treacherous. Ice that creates pretty formations on buildings becomes a hazard that can break bones when you slip, and broken bones mean death when you have no one to care for you during recovery. Medieval roads, barely adequate in good weather, become nearly impassable during winter storms. The frozen ruts and potholes that mark cart tracks can turn your ankle if you step wrong. The bridges, many of them just wooden planks thrown across streams, become slick with ice and deadly to cross. You learn to test each step carefully, to use walking sticks when you can find them, to avoid shortcuts that might seem easier but hide dangerous terrain. The forest, which provided some resources during warmer months, becomes a maze of hazards. Dead branches heavy with snow can fall without warning, crushing anyone unlucky enough to be beneath them. Stream beds that you used for navigation freeze over and become indistinguishable from solid ground until you step through thin ice into frigid water. Game trails that you followed to find water sources disappear under snowdrifts, leaving you lost in wilderness that looks the same in every direction. But you also discover that winter has its own opportunities for those desperate enough to seize them. Frozen rivers and streams can be crossed where they were impassable during warmer months, opening up new territories to explore. Ice storms that damage buildings and trees create debris that can be scavenged for fuel or building materials. Heavy snows that block main roads force travelers to take alternate routes, sometimes bringing them through areas where they might be more vulnerable to robbery or more sympathetic to pleas for help. The medieval understanding of winter weather creates both dangers and opportunities. People believe that certain days are unlucky for travel, that specific weather patterns indicate divine displeasure, that some storms are caused by witchcraft or demonic intervention. These superstitions sometimes work in your favor. A merchant who believes that traveling during a particular type of storm will bring bad luck might hole up in a tavern longer than necessary, creating opportunities for you to approach them when they're bored and possibly generous. You develop an intimate knowledge of how different materials behave in cold weather. Leather becomes stiff and brittle, likely to crack if bent too quickly, Metal becomes painful to touch with bare skin and can cause frostbite if you're not careful. Wood splits more easily along the grain, making it possible to create kindling from larger pieces if you know how to apply pressure correctly. Cloth absorbs moisture and then freezes solid, creating garments that are more like armor than clothing. The human body's responses to extreme cold become familiar territory. You know that the violent shivering that seems unbearable is actually your body's attempt to generate heat through muscle contractions. You know that when the shivering stops, you're in serious danger because it means your body is shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature. You know that the drowsiness that comes with severe cold isn't natural sleepiness, but the beginning of the process that leads to death. You've learned to recognize frostbite in its various stages, the initial tingling and numbness that warns you to seek warmth immediately, the white or grayish appearance of skin that's been damaged by cold, the hard wooden feeling of flesh that's been frozen solid and may never recover normal sensation. You've seen people lose fingers, toes, even entire hands or feet to frostbite, and you know that such injuries mean almost certain death for someone with no access to medical care. The search for heat becomes an all-consuming obsession that shapes every decision you make. You learn to identify heated buildings by the snow patterns on their roofs. Places where snow melts quickly are likely to have fires inside. You know which times of day blacksmiths, bakers, and other craftsmen are most likely to be working near their fires. You understand that large animals generate body heat that can be shared if you can get close enough without being kicked or bitten. Stealing heat becomes an art form. You might lurk near a tavern's chimney, absorbing what warmth escapes through the stone. You might press yourself against the outside wall of a bakery, hoping to gain a few degrees from the ovens inside. You might follow groups of people, staying just close enough to benefit from their shared body heat without being noticed and chased away. Fire-making in winter conditions requires skills that border on the supernatural. Every piece of tinder must be completely dry, which means carrying it inside your clothing where your body heat can protect it from moisture. Every spark must be carefully nurtured and protected from wind that can extinguish it instantly. Every flame must be fed gradually with materials that will catch and burn despite being damp or partially frozen. You learn to make fire in places that offer protection from wind and precipitation. Under overhanging rocks, in the corners of abandoned buildings, inside hollow trees that are large enough to shelter both you and a small flame. You learn to reflect heat using stones or pieces of metal to create windbreaks from whatever materials you can find, to build fires that produce maximum heat with minimal fuel. The psychology of fire becomes as important as the technical aspects. A flame, no matter how small, provides hope in addition to warmth. It creates a focal point for thought and meditation that helps pass the long winter nights. It transforms a pile of random scavenged materials into something that resembles a home, however temporary. It connects you to the most fundamental human technology and reminds you that you're still part of the species that learned to control this elemental force. But fire also brings dangers that extend beyond the obvious risks of burns or accidentally starting larger blazes. Smoke signals your presence to anyone who might be looking for vagrants to arrest. Light attracts both helpful and harmful attention. Someone might share their food with a person warming themselves by a fire, but authorities might also use that fire to locate and capture you. The time spent gathering fuel and tending flames is time when you're not moving, not seeking better shelter, not staying ahead of pursuit. The medieval night takes on qualities that modern people can barely imagine. Without artificial lighting, darkness is absolute in ways that make navigation nearly impossible. The moon and stars provide some illumination when clouds don't obscure them. But on overcast nights, you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. Moving through unfamiliar territory in such darkness is like being blind, with every step potentially leading to disaster. You learn to navigate by sound, smell, and touch as much as by sight. The echo of your footsteps tells you whether you're walking through an open area or near buildings. The scent of wood smoke indicates human habitation in the direction the wind is coming from. The feeling of cobblestones under your feet means you're on a road that leads to a town. The sound of running water guides you to streams that provide both drinking water and general direction through the landscape. Winter nights seem endless when you're exposed to the elements with no way to mark time except by watching for the first hint of dawn. Hours pass like days when you're too cold to sleep but too exhausted to do anything productive. You develop a kind of meditation that helps pass these terrible stretches, focusing on memories of warmth, planning what you'll do when conditions improve, creating elaborate fantasies about food and shelter and safety. The relationship between hunger and cold becomes a deadly equation that you understand with mathematical precision. Food provides the calories your body needs to generate heat, but cold weather increases your caloric requirements just when food becomes hardest to find. A meal that might sustain you for a day in summer becomes inadequate for half a day in winter. The extra energy needed to stay warm, to walk through snow, to shiver continuously, burns through your body's reserves at an accelerated rate. You learn to prioritize different types of food based on their heating value. Fats and oils provide more warmth than vegetables or grains. Alcohol creates a temporary feeling of warmth but actually increases heat loss by dilating blood vessels near the skin. Hot foods, even if they're nutritionally poor, provide immediate comfort and can raise your core temperature enough to prevent hypothermia in the short term. The social geography of medieval towns changes dramatically during winter months. Areas that were bustling with activity during warmer weather become deserted as people stay indoors. Market squares that provided opportunities for begging and scavenging become windswept, empty spaces that offer no shelter or resources. But this also means that the few warm spaces that remain open become more concentrated gathering points where you might find both help and trouble. Taverns become crucial resources during winter, not just for the heat they provide, but for the information that flows through them. Travelers, merchants, and local residents gather around fires and share news about road conditions, job opportunities, official policies toward vagrants, and which areas are experiencing food shortages or surpluses. A few minutes of eavesdropping in a warm tavern can provide intelligence that might save your life. But tavern owners are also business people who can't afford to let homeless people occupy space that paying customers might want. You learn to time your appearances carefully. Early in the evening before the regular clientele arrives, or late at night when legitimate patrons are leaving and might be drunk enough to buy you a drink or toss you a coin. You learn to make yourself useful by cleaning up spills, carrying messages, or providing entertainment through songs or stories in exchange for brief periods of warmth. The religious calendar provides structure to winter months that helps you track time and plan activities. Advent brings increased charitable activities as people prepare for Christmas. The 12 days of Christmas offer opportunities for better food and more generous almsgiving. Epiphany marks the end of the holiday season and often signals a return to stricter enforcement of vagrancy laws. Candlemas in February provides hope that winter is beginning to wane, even when the weather shows no signs of improvement. Each religious observance brings its own challenges and opportunities. Fast days mean less food available from religious institutions, but they also mean that people are thinking about sacrifice and might be more sympathetic to those who are suffering involuntarily. Feast days provide better scraps and leftovers, but they also bring increased security and less tolerance for anything that might disrupt celebrations. You develop a deep understanding of how medieval society's rhythms affect your daily survival. Market days bring crowds and opportunities, but also increased law enforcement. Court days bring officials and wealthy people to town, creating both chances for charity and risks of arrest. Execution days draw crowds, but also remind everyone of what happens to those who break laws, making people less sympathetic to vagrants who exist outside legal society. The physical act of walking becomes both more difficult and more crucial during winter months. Snow and ice make every step treacherous, but staying in one place for too long means freezing to death. You learn to walk differently. Shorter steps, more careful placement of feet, constant attention to balance. You learn to read snow conditions to distinguish between powder that you can walk through and ice that will support your weight versus slush that will soak through your shoes and freeze your feet. Your feet become your most precious possessions because they're your only means of transportation and your primary tools for survival. You learn to inspect them daily for signs of frostbite, infection, or injury. You learn to dry them whenever possible, to change whatever crude socks or foot wrappings you can improvise, to massage them to maintain circulation. You know that losing the use of your feet means death, because immobility in medieval times is a death sentence for someone with no resources. The sounds of winter become a language you learn to interpret with precision. The particular way wind howls that indicates a severe storm approaching. The quality of silence that means heavy snow is falling and muffling all other sounds. The creaking and groaning of tree branches that warns you to move away before they break and fall. The different tones of church bells that announce various times of day, calls to worship, or emergency warnings. You learn to distinguish between the footsteps of different types of people, the heavy boots of guards or soldiers, the soft shoes of clergy, the wooden clogs of peasants, the leather shoes of merchants. Each type of person represents different opportunities and dangers, and being able to identify them before you see them can mean the difference between finding help and finding trouble. The medieval understanding of time becomes more relevant to your survival than any modern conception of schedules or appointments. You live by the canonical hours that structure religious life: matins before dawn, prime at sunrise, terce at mid-morning, sext at noon, none at mid-afternoon, vespers at sunset, compline before sleep. These divisions help you navigate daily routines and predict when certain opportunities might arise. But winter also teaches you about deeper cycles of time. The slow progression from the darkness of winter solstice toward the gradually lengthening days that promise spring's eventual return. You learn to read subtle changes in daylight that most people never notice, to recognize the first signs that the sun's arc across the sky is beginning to shift, to feel hope in increments measured in minutes of additional daylight. The cold becomes a living thing that you battle every day, sometimes winning brief victories, sometimes suffering defeats that leave you weaker and more vulnerable. It's not just uncomfortable. It's an active enemy that seeks to drain your life force, to slow your thoughts, to weaken your will to continue fighting. Learning to coexist with this enemy, to find ways to survive its attacks while conserving your strength for the battles that matter most, becomes the central skill of winter survival. And as the deepest part of winter settles around you like a shroud, you begin to understand that surviving isn't just about making it through to spring. It's about retaining enough of yourself, enough of your humanity, enough of your will to live, so that survival will actually mean something when the cold finally releases its grip on the world. The battle for your soul has only just begun. You begin to realize that the greatest enemy isn't the cold, the hunger, or even the constant threat of violence. It's the slow erosion of everything that once made you human. The person you were before this nightmare began feels like a distant memory, someone who lived in a different world entirely. That person had a name, a family, hopes for the future. That person believed in justice, in kindness, in the fundamental goodness of humanity. But winter strips away these comfortable illusions like layers of clothing torn off by freezing wind. You discover that civilization is thinner than you ever imagined. Just a few missed meals away from collapse. Just one bad season away from revealing the animal that lurks beneath every human facade. The social contracts that seemed so solid, so permanent, dissolve like frost in sunlight when survival is at stake. You've done things now that would have horrified your former self. Stolen food from children who were hungry but not starving. Lied about injuries to gain sympathy from potential benefactors. Abandoned weaker companions when helping them would have endangered your own chances. Each compromise feels necessary in the moment, justified by circumstances beyond your control, but they accumulate like stones in your chest, weighing you down with shame and self-hatred. The moral arithmetic of survival becomes brutally simple. Is this action more likely to keep me alive or get me killed? Will this lie earn me food or punishment? Is this person a potential ally or a threat to be avoided? Every human interaction reduces to these basic calculations, stripping away the complexity and nuance that once made relationships meaningful. You watch yourself becoming someone you don't recognize. Cunning where you once were trusting. Suspicious where you once saw the best in people. Cruel where you once showed mercy. The transformation isn't sudden or dramatic. It happens gradually, one small betrayal of your former values at a time, until you wake up one morning and realize that the person you're trying to save might not be worth saving anymore. But even in this darkness, something stubborn refuses to die. Maybe it's memory, fragments of warmth and love that surface unexpectedly, reminding you that another kind of life is possible. Maybe it's simple biological programming that won't let you quit despite every rational reason to give up. Maybe it's something deeper, some essential spark that defines what it means to be human and can't be extinguished no matter how much suffering you endure. The first hints of spring arrive so subtly that you almost miss them. A slightly different quality to the morning light, the faintest softening in the air's bitter edge, the way snow melts a little faster in direct sunlight. These tiny changes that would be meaningless to most people become harbingers of salvation to someone who's spent months walking the knife's edge between life and death. But spring brings its own challenges for the homeless. The seasonal work that might provide temporary relief hasn't started yet. But winter's excuses for charity are ending. People expect you to be moving on now that the weather is improving, to stop being their problem and become someone else's. The brief sympathy that extreme cold sometimes generated disappears as quickly as the snow. Your body, weakened by months of deprivation and exposure, struggles to respond to changing conditions. Muscles that have been tensed against cold for so long have forgotten how to relax. Skin that's been constantly dry and cracked doesn't immediately heal when moisture returns to the air. Your immune system, compromised by malnutrition and stress, makes you vulnerable to the diseases that spread more easily as people emerge from winter isolation and begin mixing together again. The psychological adjustment to survival feels almost as difficult as the physical challenges. You've spent months in a state of constant alertness, always ready for the next crisis, always calculating the odds of making it through another day, learning to hope again. To plan beyond immediate survival needs requires rewiring thought patterns that have been shaped by desperate necessity. Yet somehow, against all odds and expectations, you've made it through the winter that kills so many others like you. You're alive, scarred and changed and possibly broken in ways that may never heal, but alive. The spring sun on your face feels like a miracle. The green shoots pushing through thawed ground seem like messages from a benevolent universe you'd forgotten existed. You understand now why medieval people celebrated spring with such fervor, why their festivals and religious observances marked the season's return with joy that bordered on hysteria. It's not just about warmer weather or longer days. It's about the triumph of life over death, hope over despair, the possibility of renewal even after the darkest times. The knowledge you've gained through this experience will never leave you. You'll always know how quickly comfort can disappear, how thin the line is between security and catastrophe, how little separates any of us from the homeless figures that society prefers to ignore. You'll carry the memories of winter nights when death seemed preferable to another day of suffering. And you'll remember the unexpected kindnesses that sometimes came from the most unlikely sources. But you'll also carry something else. The knowledge that human beings can endure almost anything if they refuse to surrender completely. That dignity can survive even the most degrading circumstances. That hope can flicker back to life even when it seems permanently extinguished. That the capacity for love and compassion doesn't disappear even when survival requires you to act without mercy. As you walk the muddy roads of early spring, feeling the sun's warmth slowly penetrate clothes that have been frozen for months, you realize that you've joined a brotherhood of survivors that exists across all times and places. Everyone who has ever faced impossible odds and somehow found the strength to continue. Everyone who has ever had to choose between their values and their survival and found a way to live with the consequences. The medieval world will continue to be harsh and unforgiving. Society will continue to have little patience for those who exist outside its carefully maintained boundaries. The systems that created your homelessness will continue to operate exactly as they always have, grinding up the unfortunate and discarding them without a second thought. But you've learned something that no one can take away from you, that the human spirit is tougher than any external circumstance. That survival is possible even when it seems impossible, that spring always follows winter no matter how long and dark the cold season becomes. And as you settle down for sleep on this night that's finally warm enough to rest without fearing you won't wake up, you close your eyes with something you haven't felt in months. Gratitude. Not for the life you've lost, but for the life you've managed to keep. Not for the person you were, but for the person you've become. Not for the medieval world's mercy because it has none, but for your own stubborn refusal to let that world have the final word in your story. The birds are singing in the trees above you, their voices carrying promises of the season to come. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to survive or fail, new tests of everything you've learned about what it means to be human when humanity itself seems like a luxury you can't afford. But tonight, for the first time in months, you sleep deeply and peacefully, knowing that you've survived the worst winter can offer and emerged on the other side, still breathing, still hoping, still fundamentally yourself despite everything the medieval world has tried to take from you. And in that sleep, warmed by spring air and the knowledge of your own resilience, you dream of better days ahead.